Hey, ambitious dentist, welcome to Start Your Dental Practice, the show for existing and aspiring dentists to take your dental practice to the highest possible level. I'm your host, Jonathan Van Horn, CPA and ABV, founder of dentistmetrics.com. In every episode, we aim to demystify the how to start a dental practice problem by bringing on world-class dentists, influencers, and consultants in the dental industry to pick their brain about how to get past the barriers involved from going from no practice to being a practice owner to owning your own successful dental practice. Happy New Year's, ambitious dentist. I hope you're able to finish 2017 on a strong note and are ready for a great new year. So to kick off the show for 2018, I'm excited to welcome two-time guest, Dr. Graham Dersley, back on SYDP. He's seen some incredible success since he was last on the show and continues to build the ever-popular Practice on Fire community. I think you'll find his approach on how to build a successful dental practice perfect for starting the new year strong. Here's a few things you're going to learn on today's show. Why improving the quality of your patients should be a top focus in 2018. Dr. Graham's ideal patient and why you should know yours. How just a slight tweak in your marketing strategy can improve your bottom line. And finally, the secret to leveraging the 80-20 rule successfully in your practice. Plus much more. So if you're looking to start the new year with a positive mindset and clear goals, you don't want to miss today's interview with Dr. Graham Dersley. Hello, ambitious dentist. Today, I have with us a two-time guest. I have with us Dr. Graham Dersley. Dr. Graham is a multi-practice owner, as well as one of the heads of a little group called Practice on Fire, which is a fantastic group. I've met tons of people that are a part of Practice on Fire, and they are people that if you are out there in the audience right now and you've not looked into them, you really should, because you're the perfect demographic for joining Practice on Fire, which, Dr. Graham, if you would just give us a little bit of a rundown real quick, what Practice on Fire is, and then we'll kind of jump into the meat of the topic.
Sure, Jonathan. Thanks for having me today. Practice on Fire, we've had this going for a couple of years. And the main thing that we do is an annual meeting where we have just a lot of dentists who are, like you say, ambitious dentists. And we get together and we have dentists presenting on things that have worked well for them in their practice. Right? And it's a little bit different than a lot of meetings because we have a lot of different viewpoints. So in our group, we have dentists who have PPO practices. We have dentists who have high-end fee-for-service practices. And the one thing they all have in common is that they have things about them that have made themselves fairly successful. And they're very willing to share those things with the group. And we all just learn from each other. It's a great way to just talk about ideas, how to make your career better, how to make your practice more gratifying. So our next meeting is going to be in San Diego in March.
Very cool. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But what we're coming on today to talk about is something that you found inside of your practices of, being a real practice owner, being multi-practice. You actually owned a practice and sold it as well. So you've got experience doing that. And it's something that is it's one of those weird things out there in the wild that whenever you hear about it, you think that there's no way that's a real thing. And then whenever you actually sit down and reflect on it, a lot of times you realize, hey, this actually is a real thing. That's kind of strange. And so what is it that we're going to talk about today?
Okay, so in my practice, and this is from our group, actually, we've really all noticed it. So Pareto's law, right, which is the 80-20 rule. A lot of us have heard about it, but I tell you about the origin of it. So Vilfredo Pareto is an Italian economist, and in the early 1900s, he did a study and he found that 80% of Italy's land was owned by 20% of the population. And he was kind of surprised by that. So he checked some other countries and found a similar pattern there. He also noticed in his garden, the best 20% of the pea pods produced the majority of the peas, right? So 80% of the peas came from just 20% of the healthiest pea pods. And this rule is found throughout nature and in many places. 80% of a tree's sap runs through 20% of its branches. It's almost like you can't escape this rule. Mm-hmm. Other applications are the United Nations report on income distribution. The richest 20% of the world's population earned 82.7% of the income. If you look at roads, so 20% of roads carry 80% of the traffic. But the real cool thing about this 80-20 rule is it is fractal also. So you can break it down and zoom in. And within that section you zoom into, it'll also break down to an 80-20. Mm-hmm. So like, for example, those top 20% of roads that carry 80% of the traffic, if you zoom into that group, the top 20% of those busy roads carry 80% of the traffic within those roads. And if you do the math, that means that 4% of the roads carry 64% of the traffic. So that's 80-20 to the power of 2. Mm-hmm. And you can do this again. You can take 80-20 to the power of 3, and you find that roughly 1% of the roads will carry 50% of the traffic. Right? And this is fairly true. And so, I know this isn't a podcast about civic engineering, so we should look at a business example of how this really works.
All of a sudden we turn into a mathematical theory episode, which is about, I bet you there's about 20% of people out there that are interested in that. Yeah. But, and just to dovetail off of that, I think if you keep going down far enough in that fractal design, you actually end up inside of the Fibonacci retracement sequence, which is also a math thing. So I'm kind of a math geek. So
sweet.
Yeah. So which is another thing you find in many out there in the wild in math, especially in stock prices and stuff like that. So everyone who was thinking they were going to hear, really cool stuff, but you just heard something really boring. So there you go.
20% of the geeks discuss 80% of the math. How about that?
Exactly. And we probably get about 20% of it right at the end of the day. So anyway, tell us about how you've seen this in practice, and I'm actually going to share one with you that I haven't actually discussed either, that actually I noticed in looking at my practices as well.
I'd like to talk to you about an interesting example that we see in business, and that is with a business that is much more successful as a business, I think, than dentists tend to be. Mm-hmm. And that is the National Football League. They do really well. Yep. And if we look at the NFL, they've done an analysis on their revenue, and not too surprisingly, this is roughly 80% of their revenue comes from around 20% of their fans. And same thing here. If you break it down, 64% of the revenue comes from 4%, and around 50% of their revenue comes from the top 1% of fans.
Which is crazy considering they have literally millions. Maybe tens of hundreds of millions of fans, and 50% of the revenue comes from that small of a segment of their fan base, which is insanity. It's crazy to think that's a thing.
Right, and how can that be? Like, it doesn't even make sense. But if you look at the bottom 80% of fans, this is the vast majority of the fans. Don't really go to many games. They might watch a little on TV. They might buy a cup or a t-shirt or something every once in a while. And they consider themselves fans, but they don't generate that much revenue for the NFL, maybe some advertising income. And so they might contribute 20% of the income. But if you zoom in on the top 20% of fans, 80% of that group may attend a few games, and they might buy some concessions and a little more paraphernalia. And these fans spend maybe a couple $1,000s a year on football. If you look at the top 20% of that group, these are the season ticket holders. And they buy lots of paraphernalia. They may even travel to some road games. And these are patients that spend several $1,000s a year every year on tickets. But what gets really interesting is when you zoom into that top 1%, and this counts for 50% of the revenue. These are the people who will spend a ton of money on football. These are the luxury suite holders. These suites go for $60,000 a game, and you have to have a multi-year contract to even get one. These top fans are spending over $1 million each every year on football. And the NFL, they're taking advantage of that. The new stadiums you see have a real emphasis on these luxury suites, and they're trying to really treat this 1% in a much different way than all their other fans, right? So they're harnessing the 80-20 principle and taking advantage of that. And it's really striking to me because what would happen if dentists ran the NFL? And if you ever talk to a dental marketing firm, what they might notice is that this huge group of fans, your 80%, aren't attending that many games. And they'd probably be worried about that. It's like our whole list of overdue recall patients that we have to contact and get them in. So maybe they would try to get them to see a game so that they can get hooked on it and maybe attend more games in the future, and maybe offer a new fan special. And maybe have $8 tickets that include a free hot dog, and try to really focus on that 80% and convert them into top 20% fans. But the NFL, they just flip that around. They, instead of doing that, they really focus on the top 1% of fans, or maybe, if anything, the top 4% of fans. And that's why a lot of them are building new stadiums now to incorporate all these luxury amenities, which they find are so profitable there. So basically, my lesson here is that we don't have to always treat every patient the same way they don't treat every fan the same.
Absolutely. So let's bring this into dentistry. Tell me about how you've seen that. How have you seen that reflected inside of your practice? And when, after you figured this out, how what did you adapt anything in your practice to help with this statistic, or did you notice anything about your practice that goes in with this law?
Yeah, so how can this apply to dentistry, right? I mean, it doesn't apply to dentistry, right? Surely, at dentistry, we're a separate category.
We're special. We don't end up in the statistics, right?
These rules of nature just don't apply. No, I mean, if you run a report on your practice, you'll find a breakdown similar to this. It may not be exactly 80-20, especially if you're not taking advantage of this. Like if you're a practice that mainly does pro fees and a few fillings on each patient, like you may have a more level chart of revenue. But in my practice, we do see some patients who have more significant problems, and we do have roughly an 80-20 breakdown where a smaller group of patients, around 80% of the patients will account. I'm sorry, 20% of patients will account for 80% of that revenue. And if you look at the converse of that, if you run the math on the 80-20, what you find is that the bottom 20%, according to the math, will usually account for 1.4% of revenue. Okay? So that bottom 20%, these are maybe patients who don't accept much treatment, they no-show.
Just come in for a pro fee and they're done.
Yeah. They're costing us more in overhead and staff attention than they're delivering in revenue. Okay.
That's really interesting, considering like the prevailing thought is getting more hygiene in, use your hygiene as, I've even have some people comment on hygiene being passive income. I'm like, I don't think that's very passive, but maybe if you're in a state where you don't have to even be there, it could be passive, but still you have big overhead that can, if you're adjusting hygiene, that can be rough. But that's interesting because most people say get hygiene in, get the check in, get the patient in the chair, get someone to help, or go in and diagnose, and you get a case out of it. And that's how you get big dentistry. And you're saying that you've not seen that to be statistically irrelevant.
Well, I don't want anyone to misunderstand and think I'm anti-hygiene, but there's a different approach that I want to talk about, right? Because a lot of common marketing strategies, and it comes down to incentives for the dental marketing firm. A lot of times, because we don't differentiate between our patients, the main thing that we are grading the marketing firm on is the gross number of new patients that they bring in each month. Right?
How often is the phone ringing?
Right. And it doesn't, not that many of us are really doing a breakdown on how good these patients are. Right. I'm just going to look at my report at the end of the month. Okay, they brought in 30 patients for the month. So I'm happy with that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's sign them up for next month. I'm not going to fire them. They keep their job. And so their incentive is just to bring in X number of patients. And what's the easiest way to do that? Right. It's generally this new patient cheap special thing that they all recommend. $59 for x-rays and cleaning, and we'll throw in a free sonic toothbrush to go with it. And it brings in lots of numbers, but it completely ignores whether these are your bottom 80% or your top 20%.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so what we're hoping for is that by chance, some of these will be these really good patients, right, that are going to make up the vast bulk of our production in the practice.
Yep.
So it is one approach, and it does work. There's lots of successful practices that have done well with that approach. But there's another approach, which is speaking directly to the top 4% of these patients that you want. And in my practice, I'll tell you what one of these patients looks like, right? Who are these patients?
Mm-hmm.
And it may vary from dentist to dentist, of course. We all have different preferences.
The question you just said yourself, like, what does this patient look like? Literally everyone that is listening right now needs to sit down and actually think about this, because there's so many people. It's so there's so many people that just assume it's just going to be the person that comes off the street, or it's going to be this person. And then if you look back at your history of being a dentist and seeing your big cases, you can probably figure some things out about, either who, what they looked like in terms of like, did they present themselves well? Did they, what was wrong with them? What was the case that happened? Things like that. So, but yeah, you tell me about your practice and what you tell people to look at in regards to this.
Right. So in my practice, it's fairly specific to my favorite kind of patient. One thing about these patients are they have significant dental problems that they're already aware of. So they come in, they have a chief complaint. It's not the patient who has 10 cavities but says no, everything feels fine, and now you have to, in quotes, educate the patient and try to convince them they need treatment. Right? That's just never a fun thing to have to do. So these are people who already have problems, and these problems are generally starting to impact the patient's life too. That's why they're there. So maybe this patient's been avoiding the dentist successfully for the last 10 years, and they have several broken teeth, but they're in the back. They don't really show. They've just kind of been letting things go and finding that it hasn't impacted them. Well, at a certain point, it starts to impact them, right? It's now no longer the back teeth, and they have some front teeth that are starting to turn brown and break down, and they have some missing teeth, some broken teeth. Can cause them social embarrassment. A lot of these patients are having pain. They may be suffering from lack of chewing function. If you think about it, a lot of our social events will revolve around food, right? Meeting friends at a restaurant, family gatherings around holidays. These can all be a lot less enjoyable if you're missing a lot of teeth, or if you have dentures that don't function well, things like that. So some of these patients are already starting to lose hope almost. And if we can kind of connect with them and show them that there can be hope and that we can actually improve their lives and take these problems that they're having and turn their teeth from something that's really affecting their lives into something that they can actually be proud of again, and show them examples and testimonials from other patients who've been through it. That is a great way to connect with this group of patients that are all out there. There's probably some skeptics listening to this show who say, well, I don't see these patients in my practice. I don't think my area has these patients. Could be because you're not connecting with them in your marketing. If your website has a young family with beautiful smiles on it, how does that impact the patient who's embarrassed about their teeth? Right?
Yeah.
They may think you only see patients with beautiful teeth, and a lot of these patients, in talking to them, they're very worried they're going to be judged when they come into the dental office. And it's been 10 years since they saw a dentist, and they're worried they're going to get that lecture, right? Like, oh, this wouldn't have happened if you'd come seen us 9 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So just you have to let them know that there's not going to be judgment here. You're going to come in. We see lots of patients like this. Like, and my marketing, rather than the smiling family picture, we have a few patients who have really ugly teeth. Maybe one of the patient has their hand over their mouth when they smile, and it says, if you're embarrassed about your teeth, we see lots of patients like that. Mm-hmm. And to let them know that we're the office for them to see.
Yeah. I don't know why more people don't focus on fixing people's problems, but they focus so much on marketing. Like, they focus on, I'm going to send out a new patient mailer, and I'm going to focus on the problem that they don't have a dentist because I think it's too expensive, as the only marketing that they really do. They don't focus on finding what this person's problem is, and then potentially fixing it.
Right. Yeah. If you can bring in patients who already know their problem and are pretty sold on wanting to fix that problem, and all you need to do is, work out exactly what the treatment's going to be, and, figure out a way for them to pay for it. Like, your job is just so much easier than being primarily a needs-based dentist who is fixing things that you find that are not impacting the patient yet. Those patients tend not to be all that grateful. You're not going to get a huge hug from someone after doing a little filling on their tooth that was never even bothering them before. But if you can, take someone who's in pain and take them out of pain and solve, these big life issues for them, then it's just a lot more satisfying way to practice as well.
Hey guys, sorry for the interruption. Really quick announcement for you. And if you're going to be a dental practice owner, you're at some point going to have to get a dental practice loan, whether it's going to be to acquire a dental practice or it's going to be to start a startup dental practice. You're going to have to get a loan. And I'm really proud to say that a company that I've worked with personally dozens of times over the past few years is our first sponsor after 80 episodes of Start Your Dental Practice. And our first sponsor is Bank of America Practice Solutions. So whenever you're going to be getting a new loan, whenever you're going to get a loan for starting your dental practice or acquiring a dental practice, you really want to make sure that you have three things when it comes to that loan. Number one, you want a really great interest rate. Number two, you want to make sure that the company that you're speaking with has a lot of experience and can guide you through the best path to be able to become a practice owner through the loan process. And number three, you want to make sure that the terms associated with that loan are the most advantageous for you. And I'm really happy to say that all three of these things, Bank of America just knocks it out of the park for you. It's really no brainer. If you're going to have to get a loan, which you are going to have to do 100%, you may as well go with a company that has great interest rates, has great experience with the industry, and has the best terms out there in the market today. So if you're currently in the process of shopping loans, 100% give Bank of America Practice Solutions a try. And if you would mention that you came through the SYDP community, it would help out the podcast a lot and also allow us to give back to our very gracious sponsors. Again, this is an advertisement, a paid advertisement. If you go to them, I will, have more advertising revenue come to me. So if you enjoy the podcast, I would appreciate you helping out our sponsors. And if you are interested in that loan process, just text the word bank loan, one word, BANKLOAN, to 33444. Again, that's bank loan to 33444, and we will reach out to you. Thanks, guys. Absolutely. So, I wanted to also share one example of the 80-20 rule in place inside of dental practices. And this is one that I wasn't even particularly looking for, and I actually didn't even realize it until we got on the call today that I've actually seen this in action in dental practices. And a while back, I did an analysis on all my clients, looking for what made one dental practice profitable versus another one. And we looked at a lot of different numbers. Like we looked at things like, percentage of fees from a certain amount of dental codes. We looked at number of crowns a month. We looked at, just a whole wide array of different items, looking for a correlation between profitability and numbers, basically just looking for something that pointed towards correlations of profitability. And this number was not a correlation to profitability. It wasn't heavily correlated to it one way or the other. It was pretty inconclusive, but it was an interesting number. And that was when we looked at the top 20 dental codes from GP practices, and we looked at 10 of these. We looked at multiple, more than 10, but we picked 10 to use in the study. And we found that from the top 20 dental codes in these GP practices, between 70%, 69.64%, and 78.29% of all production came from the top 20 dental codes. And now it was, I'm saying 80-20, and there was no reason. The 20 is typically 20%, not like 20 items, but it would just so happen that that's what we looked at. And so that was a range of 70% to 80% basically, and the average was about 74, 75% if I took all of those practices together and added the revenue and divide by all that. And so, that says that, if you're a practice that's not very profitable, and it might be because your top 20 dental codes are ones that you're not making as much money on, or maybe your staff isn't trained as well, or maybe you've got, all these other items going on inside of your practice. So I thought that was kind of just a strange 80-20 rule that I found in a practice that, again, I'd never even thought of talking about before until we got on the call today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not surprising at all either. I mean, it just makes total sense. One thing I want to touch on too a little bit is we talk about how certain procedures, can be more productive than others, more profitable than others. And there's a little bit of a misunderstanding, I think, in part of the dental community about, how to do more of these procedures. And, there's maybe a little bit of cynical thinking that, okay, you just diagnose more crowns on teeth that may not really need crowns and stuff like that. But that's not what we're talking about here. You notice I'm talking about a change in the marketing to attract the patients that already need these procedures. Mm-hmm. Right? We're not really looking for the guy whose wife made him come in for his cheap free insurance cleaning who swears he has no dental problems. Mm-hmm. Right? The chance of him accepting treatment is pretty low.
Perfect perio patient, right?
Yeah. he just wants what insurance covers. So it's just the change in the marketing is really a key thing here.
And it's not just, to me, it's also not just external marketing. It's also marketing inside the practice to be able to help your staff understand how it is you lead people to accept what they need. Some people, some practices aren't very good at communicating to patients about how to make that happen as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And as the good thing too is as you see more of these patients who have major problems, you get a little bit more streamlined as far as treatment planning them, and your staff gets a little more used to handling those types of conversations too. It's a lot more helpful versus if it's something that happens a couple times a year. You're not going to be as good at it. Part of it too is just changing your overall mindset, particularly about this whole thing about how we're just kind of automatically trained to try to treat every patient the same, mm-hmm. right? And if you feel like you don't have permission to do that, I'm giving you permission right now to start really maybe focusing on the patients that you want to have that are going to be the foundation of your practice. Maybe identifying those bottom 20% of patients who, we're still very polite to all of our patients, right? I'm saying I'm not saying be rude to people. We don't dismiss many patients from the practice, but I don't have a full-time employee calling, my overdue patients who don't accept treatment. Like, I mean, it's one way to do it, but I've just not had success with that. And rather than having someone focus on your bottom 20% of patients, why not have someone focus on your top 20% of patients instead? Like, I think that's a much better use of your time there.
I would agree. I would definitely agree. I mean, it's funny you say that about not having success with that. I know consultants that will charge like $75,000 just to tell you to go look at that one report. And so, but I agree. I think that's a little bit too simplistic of a way to trying to get things. And imagine the power that you're giving the practice as well to say, hey, we focus on this type of patient that has these types of problems that we're going to help and these are going to be our VIPs, if you will. And if you set a whole practice around marketing to those people, about helping those people, and then solving their problems, and you can get the staff in line with that, that's a fantastic way to be able to have the practice be, almost having, a self-fulfilling prophet, if you will.
And one other thing too is that it's pretty easy to be the area's go-to guy for these patients because honestly, not many dentists do this at all, try to set themselves apart as the practice to go to when you're embarrassed about your teeth. So, the other question I have for you, Jonathan, have you ever had anyone who's asked this question, like how many active patients are sufficient to keep a general dentistry practice productive 4 days a week?
Oh yeah, and I told most people it really depends on your capacity and your abilities as a practice or as a practicing dentist, because one person's busy is not another person's busy, and so it's one of these kind of almost it's a really nebulous number because it really depends on the dentist that you have there. Because I've got people that have they have 1,200 active patients and they're able to get 1.2 or 1.5 million dollars a year out of it, and then I've got people that have 3,500 patients and they only get 1.5 million out of those patients. So it's super, there's so much disparity in the revenue per patient on every practice that I see. And that's a big factor in being a profitable practice too. The higher that number is, the easier it is to be able to be profitable.
And don't you see that in acquisition sometimes? It's such a focus on how many active patients does that practice have? And the more is generally seen as better. But
yeah, so we do see that. But to be honest with you, anytime I see active patients in an acquisition or evaluation, I just say, okay, I'm not, whatever it is, I'm not going to believe that number. I will go and look at the production by procedure report. I'll say, okay, we did 4,000 periodic or 4,000 exams, one way or the other. Most of them, say 3,800 are periodic. I'll say, this practice is looks like they may or may not be very good at getting recalls in. I'm not sure. And then I'll say, okay, so our practice like that, if I cut it in half, they're at 2,000 active patients. And that's still obviously, a ballparking figure. Say, okay, maybe it's 1,900, maybe it's, a little bit more, but it's better than just going into EOSoft and printing off, what active patients are whenever that 75-year-old office manager has never marked a patient as inactive in her entire life.
Yeah. And it just, to me, is a very not meaningful number because it's not breaking down. You have no idea whether these are your top 20% patients that you really enjoy seeing a lot of, or whether this is just filled with patients who are not going to be of much value to you as far as building a practice around. So, again, it's one of those numbers that I think it's just similar to focusing on the gross number of new patients that come in every month without regard to the quality level of those patients. I really feel the same thing applies to active patient count.
Yeah, I would say that it does apply, but there are situations where I've had practice owners acquire practices and they had a lot of active patients and didn't have very high revenue. And I've seen them come in and revenue almost immediately goes up just because of the fact that it's a new person that maybe has had better training on, or is more charismatic than the old dentist, or the old dentist hadn't, didn't want to do some of the dentistry, and so they didn't really communicate. They didn't really give very many options. I 100% see that value go up, but I wouldn't, hang my hat on it in a lot of circumstances. Really, whenever I talk to doctors that are buying practices, I'll say, okay, do you know how much, production you're doing in a month right now? I'll say, oh, I'm doing, this much. I'll say, well, how many patients are you seeing in that time frame? Like, oh, I don't know. And I'll say, well, go back and look at it. And then when they go back and look at it, they'll say, okay, here's about how much production per patient I'm doing. And I'll say, okay, well, this practice is doing about this much production per patient. It's very round numbers. And if it's, much higher or lower, then that can be a bit of an issue, because if you're a lot lower, then you've got to figure out how to be able to get more production per patient, or they've got better patients in the practice that you may not be as accustomed to serving when you're requiring that practice. So it's one of those weird things where, you talk about buying a dental practice, and people just say, oh, I'll buy the practice, and then all of a sudden I'll do exactly what the person was doing beforehand. It's like, well, no, whenever there's a new person at the top, then things go a little bit differently. Now the past is a good indicator of the future, but it's not a perfect indicator. So anyway, sorry for that. You asked me a question, I'll give you a long-winded answer almost every time. So,
well, just related to that though, if you talk about production per patient, I think, if I were ever to try to sell, my practice, I mean, we have partners, so it would always be an internal partner coming in anyway. But if we were to sell this to an outside dentist, one thing they would look at is the revenue per patient. And they might be a little concerned by it because, we have, compared to our hygiene pool, right, we have one full-time assisted hygienist in each practice. And for that base of hygiene, our revenue is fairly high, higher than average. And the person who doesn't know much about our practice might think we overdiagnose or overtreat our patients. But the thing they don't realize is how we do our marketing different to attract patients who need a lot of dentistry coming in and who already want a lot of dentistry. Like that's really the key in my mind. So it's been a change in the way that I even think about practice in the last couple years, and it's really one of the big focuses in our next meeting in San Diego too. We just talk about that a lot.
Yeah, tell us about the meeting. Tell us about what's going to happen there. Tell us about the details of it, where it's going to be, and when it's going to be, and most importantly, the big piece of what's happening with if somebody decides, hey, I'm going to pay money to do this, what happens to their money?
Yeah, so the meeting, it's going to be on March 16th and 17th next year in San Diego. And there's a lot of details on our website. It's practiceonfirelive.com. But we have, just a bunch of speakers who are practicing dentists who have found that by focusing on these principles, it's made a big difference in their practice. So we have just dentists who have literally tripled their practice in the last 2 years by really honing in on this stuff. And they go from a typical schedule where they're doing a lot of fillings and basic bread and butter, and kind of switching over to a more comprehensive type of case where they're doing implants and just things like that. And seeing actually fewer patients, but just being more productive because of it.
Yeah, that's really, really, the ability for the doctor to be able to communicate the treatment plan and getting the patients to say yes to it. That is a critical piece of it, but you have to have the right patient in the chair in order to be able to get that person to say yes a lot of the times too. So yeah, that's and to tell me about the what all else will be at the seminar, who all will be there, who all will be speaking, and tell us about the what's going on, what you guys are doing with the revenue generated from this seminar.
Oh yeah, so the revenue piece is essentially, it's going all toward hurricane relief. We decided to make this a charitable event. Specifically, Puerto Rico is having still a lot of issues. They're going to, for many years, be rebuilding from this. So we're going to donate all the profits toward directly to Puerto Rico hurricane relief. So we're proud of that, and we're hoping to get a lot of people out there for that. We're also trying to get a lot of dental companies to participate. So we'll have some donated items that we'll be raffling off and things like that. So looking to donate at least a 6-figure check toward that.
That'd be awesome. That'd be awesome.
Really cool. Yeah.
So March 16th and 17th, 2018, San Diego, California. All profit goes towards hurricane relief, and you're going to learn about how to be way more productive as a dentist and be around a lot of people that have a lot of fun in the dental world. Tell us a bit. I mean, I remember hearing about you guys going to Miami and like all the stories that were going on with all the fun that was had there. So tell us a little bit about the other seminars you had to just give people a taste of what they'll get at the seminar.
Yeah, so I mean, Miami was really cool. We had after the seminar too, every day we all get together, and we have some neat activities for San Diego planned. We have we have a beer tasting event where we go around to different breweries and get to sample the stuff they make. We have some surfing lessons people can sign up for and do it as a group. So we have some tequila tasting as well. Just a lot of outside activities that we can all do together during the evening times, which will be a lot of fun. I find that for me, the presentations are always really good because it's not typical lecture circuit stuff you're hearing. Sure. But mingling with the other dentists who you just have so much in common with is really neat too.
It is. And what's the old saying that your network is your net worth, or that you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most amount of time with. And I find a lot of people out there in the dental world, they don't know how to connect with people that are trying to do the same thing that they're doing. And a lot of the guys that are getting out of college right now, a lot of the guys that are 5 to 10 years into practice ownership, they have a different way or different perspective of dentistry in general than even 10 or 15 years ago. And they need feedback, and they need ways to be able to see what's going on in the world, working for other people, because those things may not work exactly for you like they did the other person, because it's a lot of the person doing it that gets a lot of the results. But it gives you a lot of lessons about how to do things differently and opens your eyes to different possibilities whenever you're busy running a business every day. And a lot of us have young families as well. And so when we add those two together, it's real tough to get pretty much anything done sometimes, depending on where you are. So very big fan of Practice on Fire. Again, I've met many people that have been to the seminars and are active in that community, and they are really the cream of the crop. They're really great people and very welcoming people. Is there anything else you need to discuss about the seminar that people will need to know in order to be able to, you said you go to practiceonfirelive.com to be able to find out more about it, sign up for it and everything like that. Is there anything else that we want to discuss as far as that goes?
The one thing, we have a cool featured speaker this time. Typically it's only dentists speaking, but we found a Navy SEAL who we got to come out and talk. So his name is Don Mann. And he's a really inspirational guy. So he's going to talk about pushing your limits, doing things you never thought possible before. I think we're all going to be really motivated by his speech as well.
Very cool. Awesome. Well, Dr. Graham, thank you so much for coming on today. Everyone out there, go to practiceonfirelive.com. Check it out. If you're looking for a seminar and is this accredited CE, by the way? Is this going to be accredited CE?
Yeah. 16 credits.
See, fantastic. If you're looking for a really cool one to do, and you're tired of just going to your, somewhere in your state and hearing about the same thing every year, this is a really fun one that you're not going to want to miss. So practiceonfirelive.com. Appreciate all of you guys out there. We'll see you next time. Have a good one. Thanks again, Dr. Graham.
All right. Thanks, Jonathan.
And so that's it for today, Ambitious Dentist. Again, I'm Jonathan Van Horn, CPA and ABV. I'll see you next week with another world-class practice owner or consultants that will help you start your very own dental practice.